Listen carefully, because if this video found you tonight, it's not random. Not the time you clicked. Not the way you felt before pressing play. Not even the silence around you right now. Something pulled you here. And deep down, you already feel it. That strange pressure in your chest. That quiet voice you've been trying to ignore. That feeling that something in your life is about to change. You didn't come here for entertainment. You came here because something inside you is tired. Tired of pretending you're okay. Tired of carrying thoughts you never say out loud. Tired of fighting battles nobody sees. And maybe, just maybe, this is the moment everything starts to shift. Before you keep watching, I need you to be honest with yourself. Have you been feeling different lately? Like something is off, but you can't explain what it is? Like you're surrounded by people, but still feel completely alone? Or maybe, you've been asking questions you never asked before. About your purpose. About your life. About why certain things had to happen to you. And the scary part is, no one around you seems to understand. Because what you're experiencing is not something everyone goes through. This isn't just stress. This isn't just a bad day. This is something deeper. Something spiritual. Something that starts quietly, but changes everything once it begins. And what I'm about to tell you, most people will never hear in their entire life. Not because it's hidden, but because they're too distracted to notice. But you're here for a reason. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why everything you've been feeling was never a coincidence. What you're feeling right now has a name. Most people never realize it. They feel it, they sense it, but they ignore it. They distract themselves, they scroll, they laugh it off, they tell themselves it's nothing. But it is something. And if you're still here, listening, it means you didn't ignore it. It means something inside you is awake. Because this feeling, this discomfort, this quiet tension in your chest, is what happens when your life is no longer aligned with who you're meant to be. It doesn't come with noise. It doesn't come with answers. It comes with confusion, with questions that don't leave your mind, with nights where you can't fully rest, even when you're exhausted, with moments where everything looks normal, but nothing feels right. And that's where most people run away. They go back to what's familiar. They go back to distractions. They go back to pretending. But you didn't. You're still here. And that matters more than you think. Because the truth is, this is how it begins. Not with clarity, but with discomfort. Not with peace, but with unease. Not with certainty, but with doubt. You start to notice things you didn't notice before. You start to question things you used to accept without thinking. Conversations feel empty. People you once connected with feel distant. Places that used to feel safe feel different. It's like you're slowly outgrowing a version of your life. And you don't even know what comes next. And that's terrifying, because humans are not afraid of pain. They're afraid of the unknown. And right now you're standing in it. But here's what nobody tells you. This feeling is not here to destroy you. It's here to wake you up. Everything that feels uncomfortable right now is showing you what no longer belongs in your life. Every doubt, every question, every moment of silence is pointing you toward something deeper, something real. Something you've been ignoring for a long time. You see, most people spend their entire lives asleep, following routines, following expectations, following paths that were never truly theirs. And they never question it. They never stop to ask, is this really the life I'm supposed to live? But you did, or at least you started to. And that changes everything. Because once you begin to question, you can't go back to not seeing. Once you feel it, you can't pretend it's not there anymore. And that's why it feels so heavy. Because a part of you knows, things are about to change. Not outside, inside. Your way of thinking, your way of seeing people, your way of understanding your own life. And that shift, it's the beginning of something most people never experience. Awareness. Not the kind you read about. Not the kind people post online. Real awareness. The kind that there are signs, clear signs that something inside you is changing. But the truth is, most people miss them. Not because they're invisible, but because they don't want to see them. But you're different. You've already started noticing. Maybe it began with something small. A moment where you suddenly felt disconnected from everything around you. You were there, but not really there. Like your body was present, but your mind was somewhere else. Watching, observing, questioning. And it didn't feel normal. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable. Like you were seeing your life from the outside for the first time. And then it kept happening. Little moments like that. Moments where everything slows down. Where noise fades away. where you start thinking deeper than usual, asking yourself things you never asked before. Why am I here? What am I really doing with my life? Why do I feel like something is missing, even when everything seems fine? And no matter how much you try to ignore those thoughts, they come back, stronger, louder, more persistent. That's not random. That's a sign. Another sign is the way you've started to see people differently. You notice things you didn't notice before. Fake conversations, forced smiles, empty words. You start realizing that a lot of interactions lack something real. And it bothers you, not because you judge them, but because you can feel it. You can feel when something is genuine and when it's not. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. It creates distance, not because you want to be alone, but because you can't connect the same way anymore. And that loneliness, it hits differently. It's not the kind of loneliness that comes from being alone. It's the kind that comes from not feeling understood, from feeling like you're changing, but nobody else around you is. And that makes you question everything, even yourself. You start wondering if something is wrong with you, if you're overthinking, if you're just tired, if you should go back to how things were before. But deep down, you know you can't. Because another sign is that you're no longer satisfied with distractions. Things that used to entertain you don't hit the same anymore. Scrolling for hours, watching random content, doing things just to pass time. It all starts to feel empty, like you're wasting something valuable. And that feeling, it grows. You start craving something deeper, something real, something that actually means something, but you don't know where to find it. And that uncertainty, it can feel overwhelming, because you're stuck between two worlds, the one you're leaving behind, and the one you haven't discovered yet. And being in between is one of the hardest places to be, because nothing feels stable, nothing feels clear, nothing feels certain. But here's the truth. If you're experiencing this, you're not lost. You're transitioning. Every uncomfortable feeling, every moment of doubt, every time you feel like you don't belong, it's not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is changing. Something inside you is breaking old patterns, old beliefs, old versions of yourself. And that process, it's not clean. It's not easy. It's messy, confusing, sometimes even painful. But it's real. And right now, you're in the middle of it. So why is this happening to you? Out of all people, out of everyone living their lives, distracted, comfortable, unaware. Why you? Why are you the one feeling this shift, this discomfort, this awakening? The answer is not what you expect. It's not because you're lucky, and it's definitely not random. It's because something inside you was never meant to stay asleep. There has always been a part of you, quiet, almost invisible, that knew there was more than routines, more than surface-level conversations, more than living the same day over and over again. You felt it even when you couldn't explain it. Maybe when you were younger, in small moments, when you looked at the world and thought, there has to be something else. But life happened. Responsibilities, expectations, pressure to fit in, and little by little, that voice got quieter. Not because it disappeared, but because you learned to ignore it. You adapted. You did what you were supposed to do. You followed what made sense. You built a version of your life that looked right, even if it didn't feel right. And for a while it worked. Or at least, it seemed like it did. Until now. Because there comes a point where you can't ignore it anymore. A point where that quiet voice becomes impossible to silence. And that's where you are right now. This isn't something new. It's something that was always there, finally being heard. And the reason it's happening now is because you're ready. Not perfectly ready. Not fully prepared. But ready enough to start seeing the truth. Ready enough to feel the difference. Ready enough to begin questioning everything you once accepted. And that's why it feels so intense. Because this isn't just a thought. This isn't just a phase. This is a shift in awareness. A shift that changes how you see everything. Your life. Your choices. Your relationships. Your purpose. And once that shift begins, there's no going back. You can try. You can distract yourself. You can pretend nothing is happening. But deep down, you'll always know. Because you've already felt it. And feeling it once is enough to change you forever. That's why things that used to make sense don't make sense anymore. That's why things that used to feel normal now feel empty. That's why you're starting to pull away from things you once held on to. Not because you want to lose them, but because they no longer align with who you're becoming. And that word becoming, that's the key. You're not losing yourself. You're becoming someone new, someone more aware, someone more conscious, someone who sees beyond what's obvious. But becoming someone new comes with a cost. You have to let go of who you used to be. And that is one of the hardest things a person can go through. Because it's not just about changing your life. It's about changing your identity, the way you see yourself, the way you define who you are. And when that starts to shift, it feels like everything is unstable, like you don't have solid ground anymore. But what you don't realize yet is that the ground you were standing on before was never truly yours. It was built from expectations, from habits, from things you accepted without questioning. And now, you're starting to see beyond that. You're starting to build something real, something that actually belongs to you, even if you don't fully understand it yet. And that's why this is happening to you. Not because you're lost, not because something is wrong, but because something inside you refused to stay the same, because something inside you chose to wake up. And now, you're beginning to see. But here's the part nobody talks about. This process, this shift you're going through. Most people ruin it, not because they want to, but because they don't understand it. They feel the discomfort. They notice the changes. They sense that something is happening. And then they panic. They try to escape it. They try to go back to how things were before. Back to what felt safe. Back to what felt familiar. Back to what required less thinking, less questioning, less truth. And for a moment, it works. They distract themselves. They fill their time with noise. They surround themselves with anything that keeps them from feeling that uncomfortable silence. But the feeling never truly goes away. It just waits. And every time it comes back stronger, more intense, harder to ignore. Until one day, it's impossible to run from it anymore. And that's where most people break. Because they've spent so much time avoiding it, that when it finally hits fully, they don't know how to handle it. So they do something even worse. They convince themselves that nothing is happening. They label it as stress, as overthinking, as something temporary. And they shut it down. They go back to living on autopilot, back to routines that don't fulfill them, back to relationships that don't feel real, back to a version of life that feels empty, but acceptable. And that's the trap, because acceptable is where most people stay forever. Not happy, not fulfilled, just comfortable enough not to change. And that's exactly what you have to avoid. Because if you go back now, after everything you've already started to feel, it won't be the same. It will feel heavier, more forced, more disconnected than ever before. You'll feel like you're betraying yourself, like you're ignoring something important, on purpose. And that creates a different kind of pain, a deeper one that doesn't go away with distractions, one that stays with you, quietly, every single day. That's why this moment is so important, because you're standing at a choice, not a loud one, not an obvious one, but a real one. You can either lean into this process, or run from it. You can either face what you're starting to see, or pretend you never saw it. You can either grow, or stay exactly where you are. And neither option is easy. Let's be honest. Facing this means letting go of things you once held on to, means questioning things you once believed, means stepping into uncertainty without guarantees. That's hard, but running from it comes with its own cost. A silent one, a long-term one, a cost that most people don't realize until it's too late. A life that doesn't feel like theirs, a path they didn't truly choose, a version of themselves that never fully woke up. So the question is not whether this process is happening, because it already is. The real question is, what are you going to do about it? So what do you actually do now? That's the question that starts to grow in your mind once you realize. You can't go back. Once you accept that something inside you is changing, that ignoring it is no longer an option, you're left with something uncomfortable. Responsibility. Because awareness comes with responsibility. You can't unsee what you've already seen. You can't unknow what you've already felt. And now it's on you. Not to fix everything. Not to suddenly have all the answers. But to start paying attention. Really paying attention. To your thoughts. To your reactions. To the things that drain you. And the things that give you energy. Because the truth is, your life has been speaking to you for a long time. You just weren't listening. But now you are. And that changes everything. You start noticing patterns. The same situations repeating. The same emotions coming back. The same types of people entering your life. And leaving in the same way. And it's not random. It never was. It's all connected. Connected to what you tolerate. Connected to what you believe you deserve. Connected to the version of yourself you've been operating from. And once you start seeing those patterns, you realize something powerful. If the pattern exists, it can be broken, but breaking it requires something most people avoid. Honesty. Real honesty. Not the kind where you blame others. Not the kind where you justify everything, but the kind where you sit with yourself and ask the uncomfortable questions. Why do I keep ending up in the same situations? Why do I accept things that don't feel right? Why do I stay in places that don't grow me? Why do I ignore what I feel just to keep things the same? Those questions, they're not easy, but they're necessary, because without them, nothing changes. You just keep repeating the same cycles, with different faces, different names, different circumstances, but the same outcome. And deep down you already know that. That's why you're here. That's why this moment feels different. Because something inside you is tired of repeating, tired of going in circles, tired of knowing and not acting. And this is where things begin to shift. Not with a big decision, not with a dramatic change, but with small awareness. Small moments where you choose differently, where you pause instead of reacting automatically, where you listen instead of ignoring what you feel, where you step back instead of jumping into the same pattern again. And those small moments, they build. They start creating distance between who you used to be and who you're becoming. At first, it feels slow, almost like nothing is happening. But it is, because change doesn't start on the outside. It starts in the way you think, in the way you see things, in the way you respond to life. And once that begins to shift, everything else follows. But here's something important. You don't need to rush this. You don't need to have everything figured out right now. This is not a race. This is a process of becoming aware, then becoming honest, then becoming intentional, step by step, moment by moment, choice by choice. And right now, you're at the point where it all begins. Not perfectly, not clearly, but genuinely. And that's enough. Because most people never even reach this point. Most people never stop long enough to realize something needs to change. But you did. And that's why this matters. Because from this point forward, every small choice you make has the power to move you closer to a life that actually feels real. At some point, something shifts. Not all at once, not in a dramatic way, but quietly, almost unnoticed at first. You start responding differently. Situations that used to trigger you don't hit the same anymore. Things that once controlled your emotions begin to lose their power. And it surprises you, because you didn't force it. You didn't sit down and decide to change everything overnight. It just started happening. That's one of the first real signs. You're no longer reacting the same way. You pause more. You think before you act. You observe, instead of immediately getting pulled into the situation. And in that pause, you create space. Space between what happens and how you respond. And that space is where your power is. Another sign is that you start valuing your time differently. Time begins to feel more important, more limited, more real. You become more aware of how you spend it, who you spend it with, what you give your attention to. And suddenly, things that once felt normal start to feel like a waste. Not because they're wrong, but because they're no longer aligned with you. You begin to choose differently, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it means saying no, even if it means being misunderstood, because something inside you knows your time matters, and you're no longer willing to give it away to things that don't give anything back. Another sign is the way you start to handle being alone. Before, maybe you needed noise, distractions, something playing in the background, anything to avoid silence. But now, silence feels different. It's not empty. It's not something to escape from. It's something you begin to understand. Because in that silence, you hear yourself more clearly. Your thoughts, your feelings, your intuition. And even if it's not always comfortable, it's real. And you start to prefer that over fake noise. Another sign is that your priorities begin to shift. What once felt urgent no longer feels that important. And what you used to ignore starts to matter more. You start thinking long-term, not just about what feels good now, but about what actually builds something real in your life. And that changes your decisions, slowly, but consistently. Another sign is that you become more selective, not just with people, but with everything. Energy, conversations, opportunities. You stop saying yes to everything. You stop trying to please everyone. You stop lowering your standards, just to keep things comfortable. And at first it feels strange, because people notice. They feel the difference. Some won't understand it. Some might even question you. But that's part of it, because growth creates distance. Not always permanent, but enough to show you who truly aligns with you, and who doesn't. And that clarity is something you didn't have before. But maybe the biggest sign is this. You start trusting yourself more. Not completely, not perfectly, but more than before. You begin to listen to that inner voice. Instead of ignoring it, you begin to respect what you feel. Instead of pushing it away, you begin to realize that you already have more answers than you thought. They were just buried, under noise, under fear, under habits that kept you disconnected from yourself. And now, you're starting to hear them again, little by little, moment by moment. And that changes everything. Because once you start trusting yourself, you stop needing constant validation from the outside. You stop waiting for permission. You stop looking for someone to tell you what to do. You begin to move differently, think differently, live differently. And that's when the process becomes real. Not just something you feel, but something you start to embody. Something that becomes part of who you are. And right now, if you recognize even a few of these signs, it means one thing. You're not at the beginning anymore. You've already started changing. And here's the part that confuses most people. Just when you think you're making progress, things start to feel harder, not easier. You'd expect that once you become more aware, once you start understanding yourself more, life would feel lighter, more peaceful, more clear. But instead, it feels heavier, more intense, more uncertain. And that makes you question everything. You start thinking, was I better before? Was it easier when I didn't think this much? Should I just go back to how things were? And that doubt, it's one of the most critical moments in this entire process. Because this is where most people give up. Not at the beginning, but right here. When things stop feeling comfortable and start feeling real. Because what's actually happening is something deeper than you realize. You're not just gaining awareness. You're losing illusions. Illusions about your life, about people, about yourself. And losing illusions doesn't feel good. It feels like something is being taken from you, like something is breaking, like something you once relied on is no longer there. And in a way, that's exactly what's happening. The version of reality you were used to is starting to collapse, not because it was completely false, but because it was incomplete. It was comfortable, but not fully true. And now, you're seeing more, feeling more, understanding more, and that creates friction. Because part of you is growing, but another part of you is still holding on to what's familiar, to what feels safe, to what doesn't require change. And that internal conflict, it can be exhausting. One day you feel clear. The next day you feel lost. One moment you feel strong. The next you question everything. And it feels unstable, like you're going forward, but also falling apart at the same time. But what you don't realize yet is that this phase is necessary. Because before something new can fully form, the old has to break. Not gently, not perfectly, but completely. And that breaking process, it's uncomfortable by nature. It brings confusion. It brings doubt. It brings moments where you feel like you're losing control. But you're not losing control. You're losing what was never truly aligned with you. And that's a big difference. Because when something is truly meant for you, it doesn't need to be forced. It doesn't need constant effort just to keep it together. It doesn't make you feel disconnected from yourself. But the things that aren't meant for you, those are the ones that start to fall apart during this phase. And when they do, it can feel like everything is collapsing. But it's not everything. It just feels like it. Because you were used to it. Because you built your life around it. Because it was familiar. And now, that familiarity is disappearing. And what replaces it is uncertainty. And uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it's also where growth happens. It's where new perspectives are formed, where new choices become possible, where a different version of your life starts to take shape, even if you can't see it clearly yet. So if right now, things feel harder than before, if you feel more confused, more emotional, more aware but also more lost, that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're going deeper, and going deeper always comes before things start to make sense. At some point, you realize something uncomfortable. You can't move forward while holding on to everything from your past. It sounds simple, but in reality, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever face. Because letting go is not just about people. It's not just about situations. It's about parts of yourself, versions of you that you've carried for years, ways of thinking, ways of reacting, ways of seeing the world that once made sense, but don't anymore. And the problem is, those parts feel familiar. They feel like you, even when they hurt you, even when they keep you stuck, even when they no longer align with who you're becoming. That's why letting go feels so difficult, because it feels like you're losing something important. But here's the truth. You're not losing yourself. You're releasing what was never truly you. You're letting go of patterns you learned, beliefs you absorbed, roles you played, just to survive, just to fit in, just to be accepted. And those things, they served a purpose at some point. They helped you navigate life. They helped you adapt. But now, they're limiting you. They're keeping you in cycles that you've already outgrown. And deep down, you know it. You feel it every time you try to go back. Every time you try to act like nothing has changed. Every time you try to fit into a version of yourself that no longer feels real. It feels forced, heavy, disconnected. And that's your signal. That's your sign that something needs to be released. But what exactly do you have to let go of? First, you have to let go of the need to be understood by everyone. Not everyone will get you. Not everyone will see what you see. Not everyone will understand why you're changing. And that's okay. Because this process, it's personal. It's internal. It's not something that needs validation from the outside. Second, you have to let go of the fear of being alone. Because growth often requires distance. Distance from certain people, certain environments, certain energies. And in that distance, you might feel alone. But there's a difference between being alone and being aligned. And sometimes, you have to choose alignment, even if it comes with temporary loneliness. Third, you have to let go of control. The need to have everything figured out. The need to know exactly what comes next. The need to feel certain before you move forward. Because this path doesn't work like that. It reveals itself step by step, moment by moment, not all at once. And trying to control it only creates more resistance, more frustration, more confusion. Fourth, you have to let go of the version of life you thought you were supposed to have. The expectations, the timeline, the idea of how things should look. Because sometimes, what you thought you wanted was never truly yours. It was influenced by others, by society, by what seemed normal. And now, you're starting to see beyond that. And that means some of those expectations have to go. And finally, you have to let go of the idea that this process will be easy. Because it won't. There will be moments of doubt, moments of discomfort, moments where you question if you're doing the right thing. But letting go is not about comfort. It's about truth. It's about creating space. Space for something real to enter your life. Space for a version of yourself that actually feels aligned. Because as long as you hold on to everything, there's no room for anything new. And right now, your life is asking you to make space. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic way. But in small, honest decisions. In moments where you choose to release. Instead of hold on. Where you choose growth. Instead of familiarity. And those moments, they define everything that comes next. And then, something unexpected begins to happen. Not immediately. Not all at once. But slowly, quietly. Things start to open. After everything you've been letting go of. After all the confusion, the discomfort, the internal battles, you begin to feel something different. Something lighter. Not perfect. Not constant. But real. Moments of clarity. Small at first. Almost easy to miss. Moments where your mind feels calm. Where things make sense. Where you're not overthinking every detail. And in those moments, you feel aligned. Like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Even if you don't fully understand why. And that feeling, it's new. Because before, your life was driven by reaction. By habit. By patterns you didn't question. But now, you're starting to move with intention. With awareness. With choice. And that changes everything. Another thing that begins to appear is a deeper sense of connection. Not with everyone, but with the right things. The right people. The right moments. Conversations start to feel more real. More meaningful. Less forced. You start to connect on a level that goes beyond surface. Beyond small talk. Beyond pretending. And that kind of connection, it's rare. But once you experience it, you realize how much you were missing before. Another shift is the way opportunities begin to show up. Not in a magical way, not out of nowhere, but in alignment with who you're becoming. Things that didn't make sense before start to make sense. Paths you didn't see start to appear. Ideas come to you, insights, directions, and it feels like something is guiding you, not controlling you, but guiding you. Because when you start aligning internally, your external world begins to reflect that, slowly, but consistently. And here's something important. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy. You'll still face challenges. You'll still have doubts. You'll still have moments where things feel unclear. But the difference is, you handle them differently. You don't break the same way. You don't react the same way. You don't lose yourself the same way. Because now, you have something you didn't have before. Awareness. And that awareness, it grounds you. It keeps you centered, even when things around you feel uncertain. Another thing you start to notice is that you feel more like yourself. Not the version of you that was trying to fit in. Not the version of you that was adapting to everything. But the real you. The one that was always there, underneath everything else. And that feeling, it's powerful. Because for the first time, you're not trying to be someone. You're just being, without forcing it, without overthinking it, without needing approval. And that creates a kind of confidence that doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within. Quiet, stable, real. And once you feel that, even for a moment, you realize something. Everything you went through, every uncomfortable phase, every moment of doubt, it was leading to this version of you that feels more aligned, more aware, more real. And you understand, this process wasn't about losing anything. It was about becoming. And just when you start to feel that shift, when things begin to make sense, when you finally feel a bit more aligned, there's one mistake that can ruin everything. A mistake so subtle that most people don't even realize they're making it. They think they've made it. They think they've figured it out. They think the process is over. But it's not. Because the biggest mistake you can make right now is believing you've reached the end, that you're done growing, that you've understood everything there is to understand, that you've become the person you're supposed to be. That mindset, it stops everything. Because growth doesn't end. Awareness doesn't have a final level. There's always more to see, more to understand, more to become. And the moment you think you've arrived, you stop moving. You stop questioning. You stop evolving. And slowly, without noticing, you start to fall back. Not in a dramatic way. Not all at once. But little by little, you begin to lose that awareness. You begin to act on autopilot again. You begin to slip into old patterns that you thought you had left behind. And it happens quietly. Because comfort is always waiting. Waiting for you to relax too much. Waiting for you to stop paying attention. Waiting for you to believe that the work is done. But it's never done. Not in a negative way. Not in an exhausting way. But in a real way. Because becoming who you're meant to be is not a destination. It's a continuous process. A process that requires awareness, presence, honesty, every single day. Not perfectly, not intensely, but consistently. And here's where it gets even more important. Another mistake is trying to rush the process, trying to force results, trying to become a better version of yourself as fast as possible. But growth doesn't work like that. You can't skip steps. You can't force clarity. You can't rush understanding. Everything unfolds at its own pace. And when you try to speed it up, you create resistance, frustration, disappointment. Because things don't happen the way you expect them to. And that leads people to give up. Not because they weren't progressing, but because they didn't see it happening fast enough. And that's dangerous. Because real growth is slow, subtle, almost invisible at times. It happens in small shifts, small decisions, small changes in how you think and respond. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss it. You might think nothing is happening, when in reality, everything is changing. Another mistake is comparing your process to others, looking at how other people grow, how they act, how they evolve, and thinking you should be at the same point. But this path is personal. Your experiences are different. Your timing is different. Your process is different. And comparing it only creates confusion. It pulls you out of your own journey and places you into someone else's. And that disconnect, it slows everything down. Because instead of focusing on your growth, You're focusing on theirs. So if there's one thing you need to remember right now, it's this. Stay aware. Stay present. Stay honest with yourself. Don't rush. Don't compare. And don't assume you've reached the end. Because you haven't. You've only just begun to understand. And what comes next depends on how you choose to continue from here. At some point, it stops being just something you feel inside. It starts showing up in your real life. Not in a dramatic, instant transformation, but in subtle, undeniable ways. The way you speak changes. You don't say things just to fill silence anymore. You don't agree just to avoid conflict. You don't pretend just to fit in. Your words become more intentional, more honest, more aligned with what you actually think and feel. And people notice. Some respect it. Some feel uncomfortable around it. Some don't know how to respond to it. But regardless of how they react, you feel different. Because for the first time, you're not filtering yourself just to be accepted. Another change happens in your decisions. You stop choosing based only on what feels easy or what looks good from the outside. You start asking yourself something deeper. Does this actually feel right for me? And that question, it changes everything. Because now, you're not just reacting to life. You're choosing it, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it requires courage, even when it means going against what others expect from you. And that shift, it's powerful, because your life starts to reflect your choices. Not your habits, not your fears, not your past, your choices. Another thing that changes is the way you handle challenges. Before, maybe you reacted immediately, emotionally, without thinking. But now, there's a pause, a moment where you step back, where you observe what's happening, instead of getting lost in it. And that pause gives you control. It allows you to respond, instead of react. And that difference, it changes outcomes. Situations that used to escalate start to resolve differently. Conflicts that used to drain you start to lose their power because you're not feeding them the same way anymore. Another visible change is the kind of people you start attracting. Not because you're trying to, but because you're different. You start connecting with people who are more aware, more intentional, more real. And at the same time, some connections begin to fade. Not out of conflict, not out of anger, but out of misalignment. You simply don't resonate the same way anymore. And that's natural, because as you change, your environment adjusts. Slowly, but inevitably. Another shift is the way you see opportunities. Before, you might have ignored certain things, doubted yourself, hesitated. But now, you start to see possibilities where you didn't see them before. You start trusting yourself enough to take small steps, to try, to explore, to move forward, even without full certainty. And those small actions, they begin to open doors. Doors that were always there, but you weren't ready to walk through them yet. And maybe one of the biggest changes of all is how you feel at the end of the day. Before, you might have felt drained, disconnected, like you were just going through the motions. But now, even if the day wasn't perfect, even if things didn't go exactly as planned, there's a different feeling, a sense of alignment, a sense that you're moving in the right direction. And that feeling, it's something you can't fake. It comes from within, from knowing that your actions, your decisions, your way of living are finally starting to match who you truly are. And once that starts happening, even in small ways, your life begins to feel real. Not perfect, but real. Here's something no one really tells you. This change you're experiencing doesn't maintain itself automatically. It's not something you unlock once and keep forever without effort. It requires attention, not constant pressure, not perfection, but awareness. Because the same way you started shifting, you can also drift back, slowly, quietly, without even noticing. Life doesn't stop. Distractions don't disappear. Old environments, old habits, old patterns, they're still there, waiting. And sometimes, they feel easier, familiar, comfortable. And that's the challenge. Not starting the process, but maintaining it. Staying aware, even when things seem okay. Staying honest, even when it would be easier to ignore what you feel. Staying aligned, even when it's inconvenient. Because alignment often asks you to choose what's right over what's easy. And those choices, they don't always look impressive from the outside. They're quiet, personal, sometimes invisible to everyone else. But they matter. They shape who you become. Another thing people don't talk about is that growth isn't linear. It doesn't go up in a straight line. You'll have moments where you feel clear, strong, focused, and then moments where you feel lost again, confused, doubtful, and it can feel like you're going backwards, like all the progress you made is disappearing. But it's not. You're not going backwards. You're going deeper, revisiting things, but from a different level of awareness, understanding them in a new way. And that's part of the process. It's not about never falling back into old thoughts. It's about recognizing them faster, noticing them sooner, and choosing differently quicker. That's growth. Another truth is that this path can feel lonely at times, not because you're alone, but because you're not the same anymore. You see things differently. You feel things differently. And not everyone around you will be in that same space. Some will understand. Some won't. Some will grow with you. Some will stay where they are. And that's okay, because this journey was never about changing others. It's about understanding yourself and staying true to that understanding, even when it's not shared, even when it's not validated, even when it's not easy. Because the moment you start changing yourself, you naturally change your life. And that doesn't require forcing anything. It happens through your choices, your boundaries, your awareness, your consistency. And consistency is the real key. Not intensity, not perfection. Consistency. Choosing to stay aware every day. Choosing to stay honest every day. Choosing to stay aligned, even in small ways. Because those small choices, they add up. They create something real, something stable, something that doesn't depend on motivation or temporary feelings, something that becomes part of who you are. And once that happens, this isn't something you do anymore. It's something you are. And now take a moment. Just pause. Because everything you felt, everything you've questioned, everything that brought you here, it wasn't random. It never was. You didn't just stumble into this moment. You didn't just happen to feel this shift. There's a reason, and deep down, you already know it. Because if you look back, you can start to see it. The moments that didn't make sense at the time, the situations that forced you to change, the people that entered your life and then left, the times you felt lost, confused, uncertain, but somehow still moving forward. None of that was meaningless. Every part of it was shaping you, preparing you, pushing you towards something you couldn't see yet. And now, you're starting to see it. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to feel it. Enough to know that you're not the same person you were before. You've changed, in ways that are hard to explain, in ways that people around you might not even notice. But you feel it, in the way you think, in the way you see things, in the way you respond to life. And that change, it matters, because most people never reach this point. Most people stay in the same patterns, the same thoughts, the same cycles, for years, sometimes their entire lives. Not because they want to, but because they never stop long enough to question it. But you did. You stopped. You felt something. You questioned it. And you followed it, even if you didn't fully understand it. And that alone sets you apart, because awareness is the first step to everything, and you've already taken it. Even if you doubt yourself sometimes, even if you feel unsure, even if you don't know exactly where this path leads, you've already crossed a line most people never even see. And there's no going back from that. Not fully, not completely, because once you've seen, you can't unsee. Once you've felt, you can't unfelt it. And that's powerful, because it means no matter what happens next, no matter how difficult things get, no matter how uncertain the path feels, there's a part of you now that knows, that understands, that sees beyond the surface. And that part of you, it won't disappear. It might get quiet sometimes. It might get overshadowed by fear, or doubt, or distraction, but it will always be there, guiding you, reminding you, pulling you back toward what's real. And that's why this moment matters. Not because everything is figured out, not because everything is clear, but because you're aware. And awareness changes everything. And now you understand. Not everything, not completely, but enough. Enough to feel the difference. Enough to realize that something inside you has already changed. And from this moment forward, you have a choice. Not a loud one, not an obvious one, but a real one. You can ignore everything you've just felt. You can close this video. Go back to your routine. Go back to distractions. Go back to the version of your life that feels familiar. And maybe for a while, it will seem like nothing happened. But deep down, you'll know. You'll know that something tried to reach you, that something tried to wake you up, and that you chose to look away. Or, you can do something different. You can listen. Not to me, not to this video, but to yourself, to that quiet voice you've been hearing, to that feeling you can't explain, to that part of you that knows there's more. Because that voice, it's not there to confuse you. It's there to guide you. And the more you listen to it, the clearer things become. Not all at once, not perfectly, but step by step, moment by moment, choice by choice. And that's how everything changes. Not in one big decision, but in small, honest ones. Every single day. So don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until everything makes sense. Don't wait until you feel ready. Because clarity doesn't come before action. It comes from it. And right now, you already have what you need to begin. You don't need more information. You don't need more answers. You just need to trust what you already feel. Because that feeling, it's real. And it's been trying to reach you for a long time. And maybe this video was just the moment you finally listened. So if you've made it this far, if something in this video resonated with you, don't ignore it. Don't scroll away and forget it. Take a moment. Reflect. Be honest with yourself. Because moments like this, they don't happen often. And when they do, they have the power to change everything. And maybe, just maybe, this is one of those moments.